Three 6-year-old triplets cried in the rain in front of their mother's grave, until a billionaire appeared in the cemetery and said, "You are my daughters." Adrian Wolfe pulled his car up to the entrance of the cemetery. He hadn't planned to come here. He was in town on business, finalizing the acquisition of a company that would crown his financial empire. However, as he drove past the wrought iron gates, something made him slow down and pull in. Maybe it was the name on the obituary he had glimpsed by chance in the local newspaper left in his hotel room. Lara Collins, 32. A coincidence? It couldn't be. The name and age matched. 7 years since he had last seen her. 7 years since he chose ambition over responsibility. Drops of rain began to fall as Adrian stepped out of the car. He hadn't brought an umbrella, but he didn't mind. He walked between the tombstones, navigating by the cemetery map at the entrance that showed the most recent burials. That's when he saw them. 3 small girls, seemingly the same age, standing in front of a simple headstone. They wore different dresses, red, green, and blue, but they looked almost identical, with the same wavy brown hair and delicate features. Triplets, 3 girls, 6 years old maybe. Adrian's heart raced. A simple, merciless calculation echoed in his mind. 7 years ago, Lara said she was pregnant. Now there were 3 little girls in front of her grave. He stayed back observing. The girls were alone, no adult in sight. The one in the red dress held a small bouquet of wildflowers they'd likely picked on their way. The one in blue clutched a children's book to her chest. The one in green held a framed photograph. "Hi, Mummy," said the girl in the green dress, placing the photo on the headstone. "We brought your favorite picture. Grandma said you can see us from where you are," added the girl in blue, her soft voice almost lost in the sound of the increasing rain. "But we brought the book you read to us, just to be sure." The girl in red didn't speak. She simply placed the flowers on the marble and stared at the headstone with an expression far too solemn for a child so young. The rain grew heavier. The girls had no protection besides the thin coats they wore. They were getting soaked. Adrian knew he should approach, offer help, but his feet felt rooted to the ground. "We need to go, Emily," said the girl in blue to the one in red. "It's raining a lot." "Not yet, Naomi," replied Emily, her eyes fixed on the headstone. "We haven't told Mommy the news." "Oh, that's right," said the third girl in green excitedly. "Mommy, we started at the new school. It's far from home. We have to take a bus, but Grandma said it's better." "Sophie won a drawing prize," added Naomi, adjusting her glasses fogged by the rain. "And I learned a new song." Emily stayed silent, just watching the raindrops hit the stone engraved with her mother's name. Adrian finally found the strength to move forward. He couldn't leave them there in the rain alone. No matter how uncomfortable this moment was, no matter how many years he had spent running from responsibilities. "Hello," he said, stopping a few steps from the girls. All 3 turned simultaneously, surprised by the interruption. Up close, their resemblance was even more striking, but there were small differences. Emily had a firmer expression, brows furrowed in distrust. Sophie seemed more open, curious. Naomi was partially hidden behind her sisters, looking at him over her fogged glasses. Then Adrian saw something that made his heart stop for a moment. Their eyes. All 3 had his eyes. The same peculiar grey-blue shade he saw every morning in the mirror. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "It's raining a lot. Where is your grandmother?" "Grandma is sick today," Sophie replied. "But we live nearby, so we came by ourselves." "We're not supposed to talk to strangers," said Emily, stepping forward as if to protect her sisters. "Let's go." She took her sister's hands, ready to leave. Something in her gaze, determination, courage, protectiveness, reminded Adrian so much of Lara that he felt as though he'd been punched. "Wait," he asked, I knew your mother." The girls paused. Emily let go of her sister's hands and turned to him. "How did you know her?" Adrian hesitated. What could he say, how to explain? The rain now fell mercilessly, soaking them all. "We were close a long time ago. Were you Mummy's friend?" asked Sophie, her eyes lighting up. "More than a friend," answered Adrian before he could think better of it. The rain ran down his face, disguising what might have been tears. The drops hit Lara's headstone, washing away the picture the girls had placed there. A photo of Lara smiling, older than Adrian remembered, with 3 babies in her arms. "What's happening? Who are you?" demanded Emily, her small body tense. Adrian looked at the 3 faces before him, faces that carried traces of Lara mixed with traces of his own. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of this moment. "You are my daughters," he finally said, his voice choked with emotion. A heavy silence followed his words, only the sound of rain falling, hitting the headstones, forming puddles on the ground. "No," said Emily, shaking her head. "Our father left before we were born. Mommy said he didn't want us." "It was a mistake," Adrian confessed. "The biggest mistake of my life." "If that were true, why didn't you ever look for us?" Emily's voice was firm, challenging, far beyond her few years. Adrian had no answer, or rather he had explanations, but none that could justify 7 years of absence. None that made sense in front of those accusing eyes that reflected his own. Sophie and Naomi looked from Emily to Adrian, confused, frightened, trying to process what was happening. A stranger, soaked by the rain, saying he was their father. The father they'd never known, who was rarely spoken of, a nearly mythical figure in their young lives. "Let's go," decided Emily, taking her sister's hands again. "Grandma must be worried." But Emily," began Sophie, looking at Adrian with curiosity. "Now, Sophie," Emily insisted, with an authority that didn't match her size. The 3 hurried away, exiting through the cemetery's side gate, 3 small, colorful figures running in the rain, leaving Adrian alone in front of Lara's grave. He stood there, motionless, water running down his face, soaking his expensive suit and his Italian leather shoes. None of that mattered now. For the first time in years, nothing he had achieved seemed to have any value. He knelt before the headstone, fingertips tracing the engraved name in the stone. Lara Collins, beloved mother and daughter. No mention of him. Why would there be? He had been nothing to her for the last 7 years, nothing to his daughters. His daughters. 3 girls who grew up fatherless, who now ran away from him in the rain. A memory struck him like lightning, clear and painful. 7 years ago. His small, simple apartment, so different from the luxury penthouse he lived in now. Lara sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at the pregnancy test in her hands. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. Adrian remembered the panic he felt. They were only 25 years old. He was starting his career, had just secured investment for his first company. He had plans, dreams, ambitions. "That can't be," was his first reaction. "You were on the pill." "I was sick last month, remember? The antibiotics must have interfered." He paced back and forth across the room, running his hands through his hair repeatedly. "I don't want this now, we're too young." The look on Lara's face when he said that. The disappointment, the hurt, and then a resolve he had never seen before. "I'm not asking you to must want it," she replied, standing. "I'm just telling you. Lara, be reasonable. This is not the time. We have plans, remember? Travel, build our careers. A baby would ruin all that." She picked up her purse calmly, without drama. "These are your plans, Adrian, not mine, not anymore." "There are alternatives," he suggested, avoiding the word abortion directly. "We can handle this." The look she gave him then, Adrian never forgot. "There is nothing to handle. I'm having this baby, with or without you. Don't make me choose like this." "I'm not making you choose, I'm choosing for myself." And she left, simply walked out the door. Adrian didn't run after her. He thought she'd come back, that it was just the initial shock, that once she calmed down, she'd see reason. She never came back. He didn't look for her. He plunged into work, building his company, then another and another. He became the business genius he always dreamed of being. He earned his first million before turning 30. He traveled the world, met powerful people, had other relationships. And at no point did he search for Lara. He convinced himself she had made her choice and he had made his. He buried the memories, the doubts, the rare moments he wondered if he had a child somewhere. Not a child. 3 daughters, triplets, Emily, Sophie, and Naomi. Still kneeling in the mud before Lara's grave, Adrian felt a crushing weight in his chest. The weight of 7 years of absence. The weight of 3 lives he had helped create and then abandoned. The weight of a love he discarded for ambition. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the headstone, his words carried away by the rain. "I'm sorry, Lara." But apologies weren't enough. Nothing would be enough to atone for what he had done, or rather what he hadn't done. His daughters were now alone in the world, without a mother, with only a sick grandmother to care for them. Adrian rose drenched and covered in mud. The rain continued to fall, but it had lessened somewhat. He looked in the direction the girls had gone. They were gone, but he knew what he needed to do. It wouldn't be easy. They didn't know him, didn't trust him, probably hated him for what Lara must have told them. Emily, especially, seemed to have already formed a firm opinion of him. But they were his daughters, and he had a lot of time to make up for. Adrian glanced one last time at Lara's grave. "I will take care of them," he promised, voice steady despite the emotion. "I will not disappear again." Then he turned his back on the headstone and walked back to his car, decision made. The financial empire he had built, the important meetings, the multi-million-dollar deals, none of it mattered now. For years he chased success, money, recognition. He filled his life with professional achievements to avoid thinking about what he had abandoned, to avoid thinking of Lara, to avoid imagining if he had a child somewhere. Not a child. 3 daughters, triplets who grew up without a father, who now ran from him in the rain. 3 girls who had his eyes but didn't recognize him, who had no reason to trust him or love him. Adrian sat in the car, looking through the wet windshield at the cemetery, at the place where Lara rested. The man who had everything money could buy finally understood how poor he was. Poor in humanity, in connection, in love. He started the car. He had to find his daughters. He had to find a way to enter their lives, to earn their trust, to be the father he never was. It wouldn't be easy. Maybe it was impossible. Maybe it was too late. But for the first time in 7 years, Adrian felt something beyond ambition. He felt the weight of absence, and he was determined not to carry that weight another day. The morning was cold when Adrian parked his car in front of the light blue house. He had spent the entire night in the hotel, tossing and turning, thinking about the 3 girls who had his eyes. It was strange how he hadn't noticed that earlier, maybe because he was too busy seeing Lara in them. He hesitated before leaving the car. He didn't know if he would be welcome. Probably not. But he had promised to return, and for the first time in his life, he was determined to keep a promise. The house looked different in daylight. The blue paint was peeling in several spots. The small front garden needed care. The sidewalk had cracks with weeds growing through them. It wasn't neglect. It was the look of a place where money was too scarce for aesthetic concerns. Adrian walked to the gate, carrying a bag with gifts he had bought that morning. Nothing extravagant, just 3 identical stuffed bears, each in a different color. Red for Emily, green for Sophie, blue for Naomi. A childish attempt at connection, he knew, but he couldn't think of anything better. He knocked on the door and waited. No one answered. He knocked again, harder this time. Silence. He was about to knock a 3rd time when he noticed the side window curtain move slightly. Someone was watching. "I know someone is home," he said, speaking to the window. "I just want to talk." The door opened a few minutes later. Claire stood there wearing a flour-stained apron. The smell of freshly baked cake came from inside the house. "It's early," she said, not inviting him in. "Too sorry, can I come back later?" Claire sighed. Since you're here." She opened the door wider, letting him in. The house was even smaller inside than it looked outside. The living room, where he had spoken with the girls the day before, opened directly into a tiny kitchen where several cakes were cooling on the counter. "The girls are sleeping," Claire informed him, returning to the kitchen. "And I intend to keep them that way as long as possible. They had a rough night." Adrian placed the gift bag on the sofa and followed Claire into the kitchen. "Because of me?" Claire began removing one of the cakes from its pan, carefully so as not to break it. "Because of everything. They just lost their mother, and now a stranger shows up claiming to be their father." "I'm not a stranger, I am their father." Claire stopped what she was doing and looked straight at him. Being a father is more than biology, Mr. Wolf. It's presence. It's changing diapers at 3 in the morning. It's holding a hand during a fever. It's being there for the first tooth, the first word, the first step. She focused on the cake again. It's standing by a hospital bed when the doctor says it's leukemia and there's not much to be done. Adrian felt as though he'd been punched. Leukemia, so that's how Lara died. I didn't know, he said, voice almost a whisper. Of course you didn't. How could you? Claire began wrapping the cake in aluminum foil with precise movements. You never cared enough to look. You never wanted to know. Adrian had no defense. Every word she said was true. Why are you here now? Claire asked, wrapping another cake. What changed? It was a fair question, one he had been asking himself since he received the funeral invitation. I don't know how to explain. When I learned Lara had died, something changed, as if a part of me that had been sleeping woke up. Claire gave a sad smile. How convenient, to wake up now when she's no longer here to deal with your absence. I know it seems that way, but I want to try to make things right. I want to meet my daughters. So, and what if they don't want to meet you? The question hung between them. Adrian had no ready answer. Then I'll respect their decision, but I want to at least give them that choice. Claire finished wrapping the last cake and sighed. It's not that simple. They're 6 years old. They don't really understand what it means to have a father show up after so long. Then help me understand how I can do this the right way. Claire studied his face for a long moment, as if searching his eyes. Why should I believe you're really interested? That you won't just disappear when you realize raising children is hard and expensive. Adrian held her gaze. Because I've changed. Because I don't want to be the man who abandoned Lara ever again. Words are easy. Then let me prove it with actions. Claire crossed her arms. How do you intend to do that? Adrian took a deep breath. I would like to help financially to start. I know it won't buy back lost time, but it could make your life a bit easier. Claire looked away, her pride wrestling with practical needs. We don't need charity. It's not charity. It's responsibility. Responsibility I should have taken on 7 years ago. She fell silent for a moment, then pointed to the cakes on the table. I sell these cakes to supplement my retirement. It's not much, but it helps. Or it used to when Lara was still here to take care of the girls while I made deliveries. Adrian looked at the cakes. There were at least 10 of them, small and simple. How much do you make from each? $25 each if I can sell all of them. He calculated quickly. $250, an amount he could spend on a single business dinner without a second thought. Let me help, he insisted. Not for me, for them. Claire turned her gaze away. Things aren't easy, she admitted finally. Lara had basic health insurance through her job, but most of the money went to treatment. What was left barely covered the funeral. Where did she work? At a bookstore part-time. The rest of the time she stayed home with the girls. Adrian felt a fresh wave of guilt. While he was building his empire, Lara struggled to survive on low-paying jobs. The girl, are they in school? Claire shook her head. We had to pull them out after Lara got sick. We couldn't afford the tuition. I tried to homeschool them, but with caring for Lara, it became impossible. And now? Now we're waiting for a spot in the public school, but the waiting list is long. Adrian tried to keep a neutral expression, but inside he was devastated. His daughters didn't even have access to basic education. They need to go back to school as soon as possible. Claire gave a bitter smile. You think I don't know that? Doesn't break my heart to see them losing their childhood. Her voice faltered. But bills come every month. The mortgage is overdue. The electricity bill too. And now it's just me to take care of them. Adrian felt ashamed. He was criticizing when he should be helping. I'm sorry, I'm not here to judge. Claire wiped a tear with the back of her floury hand. They are amazing children, smart, loving. Lara did an incredible job on her own. I would love to get to know them better, really. A noise from the hallway interrupted the conversation. One of the girls was standing at the kitchen door, rubbing her sleepy eyes. It was Naomi in her blue pajamas. Grandma? She murmured. then noticed Adrian. Her eyes widened. "Good morning, sweetheart," Claire said quickly, going to her. "You woke up early." Naomi didn't answer, her eyes fixed on Adrian. "Hello, Naomi," he said, trying to smile. "You came back," she whispered, looking surprised. "I said I would." Naomi seemed about to say more, but was interrupted by the sound of more footsteps. Sophie and Emily appeared in the hallway, both still in pajamas. "What's happening?" Emily asked, immediately noticing Adrian. Her posture changed, becoming more rigid, protective. "Mr. Wolf came to visit us," Claire explained. "Adrian," he gently corrected. "You can call me Adrian." Sophie approached, curious. "Did you bring that bag?" she asked, pointing to the sofa. Adrian nodded. "I brought a gift for each of you if you want them." "Our gifts don't make you our father," Emily said, crossing her arms. Adrian felt the impact of her words but remained calm. "You're right, they don't." He knelt down to be at eye level with them. "I'm not here to buy your affection. I'm here because I want to get to know you, because I care." "You don't even know us," Emily argued. "That's true, and that's why I'm here, to change that if you allow me." Sophie glanced at the bag, clearly curious about the gifts but held back. Naomi remained quiet, observing everything with her thoughtful eyes. Claire cleared her throat. "Girls, how about having breakfast first? Then you can decide if you want to open the gifts." The three nodded and followed Claire to the small kitchen table. Adrian stayed behind, uncertain of where he fit into this family routine. "You can join us if you want," offered Claire, surprising him. "There's coffee in the thermos." Adrian accepted the invitation and sat at the table. Breakfast was simple. Cereal with milk for the girls, coffee for the adults. But there was something in that simplicity that touched him deeply. The girls ate in silence, occasionally glancing at him with curiosity. Adrian tried to think of something to say, some way to start a conversation, but every idea felt inadequate or forced. It was Sophie who broke the silence. "What do you do at your job?" Adrian smiled, grateful for the opening. "I help companies grow. I find companies with potential and invest money in them." "Are you rich?" Sophie asked directly. Sophie," Claire scolded. "That's not polite to ask." "It's okay," Adrian assured. "Yes, Sophie, I have quite a bit of money." "Then why did Mommy have to work so hard?" Emily's piercing gaze fixed on him. Adrian felt his stomach drop. "Because I wasn't there to help. And that was a terrible mistake." A heavy silence fell over the table. Claire stood and began clearing the empty dishes. "Girls, why don't you get dressed while I talk some more with Adrian?" The three stood and left, but not before casting curious glances at Adrian. Once they were out of earshot, Claire sat back down. "They know who you are," she said quietly. "Not by name, but by concept. Lara never hid that their father existed somewhere." "What exactly did she tell them?" Claire sighed. "The truth. That when she found out she was pregnant, you didn't want to take responsibility. That you chose to go your own way." Adrian felt the weight of those words. "She had every right to say that." "Yes, she did." Claire paused. "The girls have a clear idea of what a father is. They've said more than once that a father is someone who stays, and you never stayed." Her words hit him like a physical blow, simple, direct, and devastatingly true. "Can I stay now?" "It depends," Claire replied. "Will you give up at the first difficulty? Because raising 3 children is not easy, Mr. Wolf. It's not like running a company where you can just fire problems." "I will not give up." Claire studied him for a long moment. "All right, you can try, but let's set some rules." Adrian nodded, willing to accept any condition. "Dad, first, no expensive gifts. I don't want them to think they can be bought." "Understood." "Second, visit regularly, but not too much. They need time to process all this." "How often would be ideal?" "Maybe a few times a week to start." Etienne done. Claire hesitated before continuing. "And third, if you decide this is too much, that it's not what you expected, be honest. Don't just disappear, give them proper closure." Adrian understood what she was really asking. "Don't break their hearts like you broke Lara's." "I promise." The girls returned, now dressed. Sophie immediately looked at the bag on the sofa. "Can we see the gifts now?" Claire hesitated, looking at Adrian. Maybe later. Right now I need to finish wrapping these cakes for delivery. The girls looked disappointed but didn't protest. Emily took her sister's hands and led them back to the hallway, casting one last distrustful glance at Adrian. Once the girls were gone, Claire sighed. They need time, especially Emily. I understand. Adrian looked at the gift bag, feeling foolish for the simplicity of the gesture. I'll leave the teddy bears here. They can look at them whenever they're ready. Claire nodded and returned to working on the cakes. Adrian realized it was time to leave. Can I come back tomorrow? If you want. She paused. But Adrian, understand one thing, it won't be easy. They know who you are. They said a father is someone who stays. And you never stayed. Her words were simple, direct, and painfully true. Adrian felt their weight, but also their justice. I will prove I've changed. Words are not enough, Claire replied without looking up from her work. Adrian left the house with a heavy heart. At the gate, he looked back. Through the window, he saw 3 small faces watching him. When they realized he had noticed, they quickly hid behind the curtain. The next day, Adrian returned, but this time he didn't knock on the door. He left a bag of children's books at the gate and sat on the sidewalk across the street. He stayed there for an hour, just watching the house. On the 3rd day, he brought colored notebooks and crayons. Again, he left them at the door and sat at a distance. He noticed the curtain moved occasionally. They were watching him. On the 4th day, it rained. Adrian arrived with a basket of fresh food. Fruit, bread, cheese, things he'd noticed were missing during his brief visit. He left the basket on the covered porch and returned to his car. A week passed in this rhythm. Adrian showed up every day with something small and useful. Pantry staples, school supplies, new clothes for the girls. He never knocked on the door or demanded to be let in. He just left the items and sat on the sidewalk or stayed in his car depending on the weather. Claire watched him from the window sometimes. Once she actually came out and offered him a cup of coffee, which he accepted gratefully. They briefly talked about the weather, Sophie's medications, how the girls were processing everything. But she never invited him in again. The girls were ghostly presences behind the curtains. Adrian knew they were watching him. Sometimes he saw 3 pairs of curious eyes peeking out. When he waved, the curtains closed quickly. He didn't know if he was doing the right thing. He didn't know if he would ever be accepted, but he knew he had to try. He had to show consistency, patience, persistence, everything he hadn't shown Lara. One day, as he was leaving a bag of fruits and vitamins at the gate, he noticed a small drawing taped to the door. 3 stick figures wearing brightly colored dresses, red, green, and blue. Next to them, a larger stick figure alone. There were no lines connecting them, no smiles on their faces, just those simple figures on paper. Adrian carefully took the drawing and put it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. It was little, but it was a start, a silent acknowledgement of his existence. Sitting on the sidewalk that afternoon, Adrian watched the house with a new feeling in his chest. It wasn't happiness, it was far from that. It was hope, a small flame of hope he would protect at all costs. He wouldn't demand a place in their lives. He would just keep waiting, leaving gifts, being a constant, patient presence. He would wait however long it took, because now he understood what Claire had said. A father is someone who stays, and this time he would stay. 2 weeks had passed since Adrian began his routine. Every day he appeared at the same time, left something useful at the gate, and sat on the sidewalk in front. Sometimes he stayed for an hour, sometimes 3. He never asked to be let in, never demanded attention. The neighborhood had noticed. Curious glances multiplied. The rich man in the fancy car who sat on the sidewalk like a silent guardian had become talk of the town. On that Saturday morning, the sky was especially blue. Adrian arrived at his usual time, but today he brought something different. 3 small puzzles, each with a different picture. A starry sky for Emily, a colorful garden for Sophie, a blue ocean for Naomi. As always, he left the bag at the gate and went to sit on the sidewalk. He had been there about 20 minutes when the front door opened. Claire stepped out, wearing a simple dress and her hair in a loose bun. She looked years older over the past few weeks, but there was something different in her gaze today. A decision made after much reflection. "Adrian," she called, standing at the gate. "Why don't you come in for coffee?" He rose slowly, trying to hide his surprise and emotion. It was the first time in 10 days he'd been invited in. "Thank you," he answered simply, crossing the street. Claire took the bag with the puzzles. "More gifts. I thought you might like them for rainy days." Claire nodded and opened the gate for him. The house seemed brighter today, with the curtains open letting the sun in. On the living room sofa, the 3 girls sat in a row like little birds on a wire. They all wore clean dresses, though visibly worn from use. Their hair was styled in identical braids. "Hello," Adrian said, stopping at the entrance to the living room. The girls didn't respond, but they didn't look away either. It was progress. "Girls," said Claire, placing the bag on the table. "Mr. Wolf, Adrian brought puzzles for you." Sophie, always the most expressive, let a small smile slip out. Naomi looked at the bag with curiosity. Emily kept her face serious, but her eyes betrayed interest. "I'll make coffee," Claire said, heading to the kitchen. "Why don't you show them the puzzles?" Adrian understood. Claire was giving him a chance. Slowly, as one approaches wild animals, he walked to the table and opened the bag. "This one has stars," he said, showing the first. "This one has flowers and butterflies. And this one has the ocean with colorful fish." The girls stayed on the sofa, watching. "You can choose whichever you like," he continued, placing the 3 puzzles on the table. After a moment's hesitation, Sophie was the first to stand. She approached the table and pointed to the garden puzzle. "Can I have that one?" "Of course," Adrian replied, smiling. "I thought you'd like that one." Sophie took the box and went back to the sofa. Naomi was next, timidly stepping forward. "I want the ocean one," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's yours." Emily stayed on the sofa, but her eyes were fixed on the star puzzle. Adrian picked it up and held it out to her. "I thought of you when I saw this one." After a moment's hesitation, Emily stood and took the puzzle, returning quickly to her spot on the sofa. "Thank you," she said so quietly that Adrian nearly missed it. Silence settled in the room again. The girls looked down at the boxes in their laps but didn't open them. Adrian sat in the armchair by the window, giving them space. The tick-tock of the clock on the wall sounded deafening. Claire returned with a tray, bringing coffee for her and Adrian and 3 cups of juice for the girls. "Why don't you open the puzzles on the dining table?" she suggested. "There's more room there." The 3 nodded and took their gifts to the table. Adrian and Claire stayed in the living room, watching them from a distance as they sipped coffee. "They talked about you last night," Claire said quietly. "They asked why you keep coming back." "And what did you say?" "The truth, that you want to get to know them." Adrian looked at the girls, now absorbed in sorting the pieces of their puzzles. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Claire sighed. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for them." She paused. "Emily had a nightmare last night. She said she was afraid you'd disappear like their mother did." The revelation hit him like a blow. "I will not disappear. That's what I've been telling them, but words don't mean much after everything they've been through." Claire took a sip of coffee. "They need actions, consistency. That's why I come every day. I know, that's why you're here today." Adrian felt a wave of gratitude for this woman, who, despite every reason to hate him, was giving him a chance. "Claire, I want to do more than just visits and small gifts. I want to help financially, for real." She lowered her cup. "We've talked about this. It's not for me nor for you, it's for them." He looked at the girls. "They need to go back to school. They need new clothes, a leak-free home, a better life than what I can see they have now." Claire remained silent for a long moment. "Bills keep coming," she admitted finally. "The mortgage, the electric bill, basic health insurance for the girls." She took a deep breath. "Sophie needs a specialist for her asthma. Naomi's glasses have been broken for months, and we don't have money for new ones. Emily needs therapy to deal with losing their mother." Adrian felt the weight of those words, those urgent, real problems that he could solve, with what for him would be an insignificant amount. Let me take care of all of that, please. Claire finally nodded. All right, but with one condition. What? That you talk to them today, for real. No beating around the bush, no trying to buy their affection. Just the truth. Adrian swallowed. The truth, the hardest part. I will. They finished their coffee in silence, watching the girls working diligently on their puzzles. After a while, Claire stood up. Girls, come here for a minute. Adrian wants to talk to you. The three lifted their heads, looking first at their grandmother, then at Adrian. Slowly, they left their seats at the table and returned to the sofa. Adrian took a deep breath and walked to them, kneeling so he could be at eye level. It was now or never. I know you must be confused by all of this, he began. By who I am, why I show up every day, why I bring gifts. The three watched him with full attention now. The truth is that... He felt his throat tighten but forced himself to continue. I know I made a mistake, a big mistake when I didn't stay with your mother, when I didn't help raise you. Emily crossed her arms, a defensive posture that Adrian had learned to recognize. Why didn't you stay? She asked, her voice carrying more hurt than one so young should hold. Adrian decided they deserved the full truth, in language they could understand. Because I was young and selfish, because I was afraid of being a father, because I thought my work and my money were more important than family. He paused. And that was the biggest mistake of my life. Those words hung in the air. Sophie and Naomi looked at Emily, as they always did when they needed guidance. If you want, Adrian continued, choosing his words carefully, I would really like to get to know you for real, on your terms, in the way you prefer. Why? Naomi asked, surprising everyone with her direct involvement in the conversation. Because you are my daughters, Adrian replied, his voice choking, and because even without knowing you well, I already love you, more than I ever thought I could love anyone. Sophie uncrossed her arms, her face softening. And if we don't want to? Then I will respect your decision, but I will keep coming every day until you change your minds, or until you grow up and can tell me for sure that you don't want me around. The raw honesty seemed to touch even Emily, whose eyes now shone with tears held back. We can't call you Dad, she said finally, her voice small but firm. Adrian felt the pain of those words, but also the small miracle of Emily speaking directly to him, opening a door even if just a crack. That's okay, he responded with a sad smile. I'm here to earn that name. You can call me Adrian for now. A comfortable silence settled in the room. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a start, a small step toward something that could, one day, become a family. Can I make a suggestion? Claire asked from the doorway, observing the scene. Why don't we all go to the park today? It's a beautiful day and the girls need fresh air. Adrian looked at the three, waiting for their reaction. Would you like to go to the park with me and Grandma? Sophie nodded immediately. Naomi looked at Emily, who after a moment of thought gave a small nod. I'll get your sandals, Claire said, leaving the room. While they waited, Adrian returned to his armchair, giving the girls space to process the conversation. Sophie was the first to break the silence. Does the park have swings? I think so, Adrian answered, and I think there's a seesaw too. I like seesaws, Naomi said shyly. Me too, Adrian replied, smiling. When I was a child, I spent hours on the seesaw. It was a trivial detail, but it was the first personal thing he'd shared with them, the first brick of a bridge he hoped to build. Claire returned with the girls' sandals and a small bag. Ready? The park was a few blocks from the house. They walked together, Adrian and Claire on the ends, the three girls between them. At first they kept distance from Adrian, but as they walked, Sophie moved closer, until she was just one step away from him. The park was simple but well kept. There were basic pieces of equipment, swings, a seesaw, a slide, and a small grassy area with some trees for shade. It wasn't very crowded, just a few other families enjoying the sunny day. The girls ran to the swings as soon as they arrived. Adrian and Claire sat on a nearby bench watching them. They look happy, he commented. They are children, Claire replied. Children have an incredible ability to find joy even in the hardest moments. After a few minutes on the swings, Naomi came over to them. Can you push me? She asked Adrian, her voice still timid but eyes full of hope. Adrian's heart raced. Of course. He followed her to the swing and began to push her gently. Soon Sophie also wanted to be pushed, and he took turns between the two. Emily stayed on her own swing, pushing herself, but watching their interaction with interest. After the swings, they went to the seesaw. Adrian helped balance the weight so they could play together. The girls' laughter filled the air, a sound he had never heard before, and that now seemed like the most beautiful music in the world. When they tired of the seesaw, they all sat together on the grass under the shade of a large tree. Claire had brought a bottle of water and some cookies, which they shared. "What do you do for work?" Naomi asked suddenly, her curiosity overcoming shyness. Adrian smiled, genuinely happy she wanted to know more about him. "I buy companies. I help people improve their businesses," he replied, keeping the explanation simple without boasting. Then he added sincerely, "But now my most important job is learning to be a father." The girls seemed to reflect on that. It was a strange concept for them, an adult wanting to learn something so fundamental. "How do you learn to be a father?" Sophie asked, tilting her head curiously. "I think the same way you learn anything important," replied Adrian. "By paying attention, listening, trying not to repeat the mistakes, and most importantly, by being present." He looked at each of them, wanting them to understand how committed he was. "And you, what do you like?" he asked, turning the conversation to them. "What makes you happy?" "I like to draw," Sophie replied promptly, her eyes shining. "I like to use all the colors." "She's very good," Claire added proudly. "Her drawings are all over the fridge." "I'd love to see them," said Adrian sincerely. "I like to sing," said Naomi, her soft voice matching her nature. "Mommy said I had a bird's voice." "I'm sure it's beautiful," said Adrian, feeling his heart tighten thinking of Lara praising her daughter. Everyone looked at Emily, who hadn't spoken yet. She played with a fallen leaf, twirling it between her fingers. "And you, Emily?" Adrian asked gently. "What do you like?" She raised her eyes, studying him for a moment. Then, as if she'd made an important decision, she answered, "I like stories, especially those with a happy ending." The response took him by surprise. There was so much in those simple words. Hope despite everything she'd been through, a desire for something better, maybe even a slightly open door for him. "Stories with happy endings are the best," Adrian agreed, holding back emotion. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, full of possibilities. For the first time, the conversation had been genuine. They were no longer strangers forced into a difficult situation. They were people beginning to get to know each other, forming bonds. "Grandma makes the best chocolate cake in the world," Sophie said suddenly, changing the subject entirely as only children can. "Really?" Adrian responded, joining the conversation enthusiastically. "Yes," confirmed Naomi, "with dripping frosting." "Now I want to try it," said Adrian, smiling at Claire. "Maybe one of these days," she replied. And there was something in her voice suggesting that day might not be far off. They stayed in the park for another hour. The girls played on the slide, ran on the grass, chased butterflies. Adrian and Claire talked about practical things, the school the girls would attend, the doctors they needed to visit, plans for the immediate future. As evening approached, they gathered to go home. On the way back, something happened that Adrian didn't expect. Sophie reached out her small hand and held his. It was a simple, instinctive gesture, the kind children do without much thought. But to Adrian, it felt as though the entire world had stopped. Naomi, seeing her sister, did the same on the other side. Emily kept her distance, but she no longer seemed so hostile. They walked like that back to the house, a small family forming. It wasn't perfect, far from it. There was much to rebuild, much to learn, much to forgive. But it was a beginning. And for someone who had almost lost everything, a beginning was more than enough. A month had passed since that first park outing. The routine was now different. Adrian came every day after work, had dinner with them, helped bathe the girls, read bedtime stories. On weekends, he took them out, to the zoo, the movies, small fairs in the town square. The changes in the house were visible. The roof no longer leaked. The refrigerator was always full, the bills were paid on time. The girls had returned to school, wearing new uniforms and carrying colorful backpacks. Sophie got proper treatment for her asthma. Naomi wore new glasses with blue frames that matched her favorite dresses. Emily had started therapy twice a week. It was a Thursday night. The girls were already asleep. Adrian and Claire sat in the living room having tea. There was a calm between them now, a silent understanding. "You've been good to them," Claire said, breaking the silence. Adrian smiled softly. "They've been good to me." Emily said, "You're not as bad as she thought." Adrian chuckled quietly. "Coming from her, that's practically a declaration of love." Claire smiled, but there was something in her eyes, an important decision to share. "There's something I want to show you," she said, standing up. "Wait here." Adrian nodded, curious. Claire left the room and returned a few minutes later, carrying a worn shoebox and a yellowed envelope. She sat next to him on the sofa. "After Lara found out about the illness, she organized a few things. For the girls, for me." Claire opened the box. "And somehow for you too." Adrian looked at the box, feeling a knot form in his throat. Claire took out a photo album from inside, simple, with a blue synthetic leather cover. "She made this so the girls wouldn't forget her, but I thought you should see it too." With slightly trembling hands, Adrian took the album. He opened it to the first page. It was a photo of Lara sitting on a hospital bed, smiling tiredly with 3 small bundles in her arms. Below, a date and a simple note. "The day we became 4. He turned the page. Lara breastfeeding the babies, Lara changing diapers, Lara asleep in a chair with Emily on her lap. Each image showed a young woman exhausted but radiant. Adrian ran his fingers over the photographs as if he could touch those moments, that life that had happened without him. The following pages showed the girls growing up. First teeth, first steps, first day at daycare. Simple birthdays with homemade cakes and few presents but many smiles. In every photo, Lara looked a bit more tired, a bit thinner, but her smile for her daughters never faded. Adrian could see the overflowing love in her eyes, the same look he now saw in triplicate every day. "She worked 2 jobs when they were babies," Claire commented as he flipped through the album. "Mornings at the bookstore, nights cleaning offices. I stayed with the girls while she worked." Adrian couldn't speak. The guilt, the shame, the admiration for that woman who raised his daughters alone, it all overwhelmed him. "She never complained," Claire continued. "Not once. She said every second of exhaustion was worth it when she came home and they ran to hug her." Adrian came to a photo that made him stop. Lara in a hospital bed, visibly sick, with the 3 girls by her side. Even there, weak and debilitated, she smiled at them. The date showed it was taken just 2 months before her death. When she knew she didn't have much time, Claire's voice broke. Her only concern was what would happen to the girls. She didn't have enough life insurance, no savings. She only had me, an old woman with a small pension. Adrian closed the album, unable to see more. His vision blurred by tears he refused to shed. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "If I had known." "But you didn't," Claire interrupted without resentment, just stating a fact. "Because you chose not to know." She took the envelope and handed it to Adrian. "She wrote this a week before she died. She asked me to keep it, said that maybe one day you'd show up." Adrian took the envelope with trembling hands. His name was written on the front, in the delicate handwriting he still remembered. He opened it carefully, as if handling something precious and fragile. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a few lines. "Adrian, if you are reading this, it means you have finally met our daughters. Yes, ours. Because despite everything, they have your blood, your eyes, and sometimes, when Emily furrows her brow in concentration, I see you in her. It was hard to raise the girls without you. Thankfully, my mother helped me. I hope that one day you regret never wanting to know them. They are very special. They deserve a future better than mine. I hold no grudges, Adrian. I didn't have time for that. Life is too short to waste on bitterness. I only hope that if one day you find them, it is to stay. They have already lost a mother. They don't deserve to lose a father twice." Lara? The tears Adrian tried to hold back finally escaped. They ran down his face silently at first, then in sobs that shook his shoulders. He no longer had strength to deny or pretend control. Only the raw, bare truth of his abandonment, the suffering he caused, the life he could have had. Claire placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture of compassion he didn't deserve but accepted gratefully. "I never knew," he said through sobs. "I never tried to know. How could I have been so selfish?" "The past can't be changed," Claire replied softly. "But the future is still in your hands." Adrian reread the letter, each word like a sharp blade in his heart. "I hold no grudges." How did she manage that? How could she be so strong, so generous, while he was so weak, so petty? "They look so much like her," he murmured. "Sophie's kindness, Naomi's sensitivity, Emily's strength." "Yes," Claire agreed. "And they have things of yours too, the determination, the intelligence. They're the best of both of you." Adrian carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. He wiped his tears with the back of his hands, feeling like a kid caught in a serious mischief. "Thank you for showing me this," he said, "for giving me the chance to know them." Claire took the album and the envelope, putting them back in the box. "I didn't do it for you," she said without hostility. "I did it for them and for Lara because I know that despite everything, she would want you to meet them." Adrian nodded, understanding. The pain in his chest was almost physical, but there was something else now, a resolve, a clear purpose. "I will take care of them," he promised. "I will do everything in my power to give them the future Lara wanted." "I know," Claire replied simply. Adrian stood, still shaken. He needed air, space to process all he had discovered, all he had felt. "I need to go," he said, "but I'll come back tomorrow. They will be waiting for you." At the door, Adrian stopped and looked at Claire. "I can never make up for the years I lost. I can never thank Lara for what she did." "I know," Claire agreed, "but you can honor her sacrifice by being the father they deserve now." Adrian walked out into the cool night, Lara's letter etched in his memory, the images from the album burning in his mind. No more denial was possible, only the painful, freeing truth. And with that truth, a silent promise to Lara, to the girls, to himself. This time he would stay, this time he would be worthy of them. The next morning, after revealing the photo album and letter, Adrian didn't go to work. He cancelled all meetings and asked his assistant to reorganize his schedule for the coming weeks. He had important decisions to make. Sitting in his hotel apartment, he stared out the window at the small town he never imagined returning to, let alone thinking of staying. His phone rang insistently, investors, business partners, all wanting his attention. For the first time in years, those calls seemed irrelevant. Lara's words wouldn't leave his mind. "They deserve a future better than mine." How could he provide that? It wasn't just about money. He had plenty of that. It was about presence, consistency, true commitment. That afternoon, he drove to Claire's house. The girls were still at school. It was the perfect moment for the conversation he needed to have. Claire was in the kitchen when he arrived, preparing another batch of cakes to sell. The sweet smell filled the air, but Adrian noticed her fatigue, deep lines under her eyes, small burn marks on her hands from the oven, the slump in her posture from carrying too much on her shoulders. "Adrian?" Claire seemed surprised to see him so early. "The girls don't come back until 3. I actually came to talk to you." Claire wiped her hands on her apron and gestured toward the kitchen table. "Is something wrong?" Adrian sat down, choosing his words carefully. "I spent the night thinking about Lara's letter, about the girls, about you." Claire waited patiently. "I've seen how hard it is for you," he continued. "The bills, the house, caring for the girls, the cakes." He gestured to the kitchen. "It's too much for one person." "We're managing," Claire replied, with the pride of someone who's always solved everything alone. "I know, and I admire your strength, but it doesn't have to be like this anymore." Adrian took a deep breath. "I want to propose something permanent, not just occasional financial help." Claire crossed her arms, skeptical. "What kind of proposal?" "You don't need to sell cakes anymore. I want to take care of you with respect and consistency." Claire uncrossed her arms slowly. Why? Because it's the least I can do after so many years away. Because I want to make up in some way for what Lara and you sacrificed. And how long will this arrangement last? Her question was direct, no beating around the bush. Until you get tired, until a better opportunity comes along somewhere else. Adrian understood the fear behind her words. The fear that he would disappear again, leaving an even bigger void than before. I will stay, Claire, for as long as necessary. Forever, if you'll have me. She studied him as if trying to read his soul. The girls are getting attached to you. Sophie already asks about you when she wakes up. Naomi draws you in her schoolwork. Even Emily. She hesitated. Even Emily smiles when she hears your car pull up. The revelation made Adrian's heart tighten. He hadn't realized how much he was already intertwined in their lives. If you leave now, Claire continued, her voice firm, you will break something in them that might never heal. I won't leave. Words are easy, Adrian. Lara heard them too. The blow was sharp but fair. I know. Adrian held her gaze. But I'm not that immature, selfish guy anymore. I've discovered there are things more important than money or success. Claire didn't answer immediately. She got up and went to the window, looking at the neglected garden. This house holds many memories, she said as if thinking aloud. Good and bad. Lara grew up here. The girls were born here. We can find a new place, Adrian suggested. Bigger, more comfortable, close to their school. Claire turned to him. Oh, and where would you stay? The question hung in the air. Adrian hadn't thought about that concretely. I could find a place nearby. And how do you intend to be a present father living somewhere else? Adrian understood her point. You're suggesting I live with you? I'm saying if you want to be part of this family, truly be part of it. Don't leave at the end of the day. Don't be a visitor in their lives. The proposal took him by surprise. He hadn't considered that possibility. Would you accept that, after everything? Claire shrugged. It's not about me. It's about them, about what's best for their future. Adrian reflected for a moment. Living with them would mean changing his life completely, leaving his apartment in the capital, reorganizing his businesses, putting down roots in a small town. But it would also mean waking up and seeing his daughters every day, being there for breakfast, for dinner, for homework, truly knowing them, not just in planned visits. This time I'm here to stay, he said, emotional, for real. Something in Claire's expression softened. Then let's do this right. In the following weeks, their lives changed completely. Adrian found a spacious house on the outskirts of town, close enough to the school for the girls to walk. It had 4 bedrooms, a large yard, and a kitchen that made Claire's eyes light up. The move was quick. There wasn't much to take from the old house, just clothes, the girls' toys, a few keepsakes. Adrian provided the rest. New furniture, modern appliances, everything they might need. The girls participated in decorating their rooms. Sophie chose green walls and a boat-shaped bed. Naomi opted for light blue walls with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Emily, always more reserved, asked for a large bookshelf, but Adrian noticed how her eyes lit up when he brought wallpaper with a world map for her room. Adrian set up a home office where he could run his businesses without constant travel. He hired a team to manage day-to-day operations at his offices in the capital. His partners didn't understand the sudden change, but he was firm. His priorities had shifted. Claire got a comfortable bedroom with a small balcony overlooking the garden. In the first days, she seemed disoriented by the sudden comfort, by not having to wake at 5 to bake cakes, by having time for herself. What do I do now? She asked Adrian a week after the move. Rest, he replied. Take care of your health. Do what you always wanted but never had time for. And she laughed, a sound Adrian rarely heard. I don't even know what I used to enjoy. You have time to find out. The new routine took hold gradually. Adrian took the girls to school every morning. At first, he was awkward, forgetting backpacks, lunchboxes, homework. The girls laughed at his mistakes, and even Emily occasionally corrected him with a small smile. That's not how you make a braid, she said one morning, watching him struggle with Sophie's hair. Can you teach me? He asked, genuinely interested. Emily hesitated, then nodded. With surprising patience for a 6-year-old, she showed him how to weave the strands. Adrian watched carefully, aware it was more than a lesson on braiding. It was a moment of connection, a small trust being built. In the afternoons, Adrian learned to make snacks. At first, they were just simple sandwiches, but soon he was experimenting with recipes he found online, especially for Sophie, who was more particular about food. "That tastes like real strawberry," she exclaimed one day, biting into a muffin he had baked. "Because it has real strawberry," he replied, proud of his small culinary victory. At night, they established a bedtime reading routine. Each girl chose a book and they took turns reading in their rooms. Adrian discovered that Naomi liked animal stories, Sophie preferred action-packed adventures, and Emily, true to her thoughtful nature, enjoyed more complex tales with hidden lessons. It was during one of these bedtime reading sessions that Emily asked a question that took him by surprise. "Are you going to live here forever?" Adrian closed the book he was reading and looked into her eyes. "Yes, Emily, I will live here forever." "Promise?" There was so much vulnerability in that one word that Adrian felt a lump in his throat. "I promise, this is my home now. You are my home." Emily studied his face for a moment, as if looking for signs of a lie. Then she nodded slightly and settled back to listen to the rest of the story. Claire changed too. With the financial burden lifted from her shoulders, with Adrian's daily help, she began to relax. The worry lines on her face softened. She resumed knitting, a hobby she had abandoned years ago. She joined a book club at the local library. Occasionally she baked cakes, not out of necessity but for pleasure. "You look younger," Adrian commented one day as they had coffee after the girls went to bed. Claire smiled. "I feel younger, or at least less tired." "I'm glad." "You changed our lives, Adrian." He shook his head. "You changed mine. Before I just existed. Now I truly live." The transformation in the girls' lives was even more profound. With financial stability, they returned to school regularly. Sophie, who used to miss classes due to asthma, now had proper medical care. Naomi, who had always been shy, began taking singing lessons and gradually came out of her shell. Emily, initially the most resistant, flourished with therapy and unlimited access to books. They still missed their mother, of course. There were nights Adrian could hear crying from one of the rooms, occasions when one of them would sit quietly, staring at a photo of Lara, times when they asked for stories about what she was like when she was young. In those moments, Adrian and Claire came together to comfort, to remember, to keep Lara's memory alive, not as a ghost haunting them, but as a loving presence that would always be part of their lives. One Sunday morning, about 3 months after the move, Adrian watched from the porch as the girls played in the garden. Claire joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Look at them," she said softly. "They're happy." It was true. Sophie ran in circles, her face red with excitement, without any sign of breathing trouble. Naomi hummed as she made a flower crown. Emily sat under a tree, reading, but occasionally looked up to smile at her sisters. "I never thought it could be like this," Adrian admitted, "that I could feel and so much peace." Claire nodded. "That's what happens when you finally find your place." Adrian knew she was right. After years building a fortune, chasing success, filling his life with things that didn't really matter, he had finally found his place. Not in a luxurious office, not in a penthouse apartment, but there, in that simple house, with those 4 people who had become his family. For the first time in a long time, perhaps the first time in his life, the family breathed, all of them, without the weight of absence, scarcity, abandonment, just the present, with all its small, everyday joys and the future full of possibilities. "Adrian," Sophie called from the garden, "come see the giant worm we found." He laughed and set his coffee down on the table. "Duty calls." Claire smiled. "They're waiting." And he ran through the lawn like a child, ready to marvel at a worm that was probably not that giant, but that, in his daughter's eyes, was the most amazing thing in the world. It was a simple life, even ordinary, so different from what he'd imagined for himself years ago, and infinitely more valuable. 6 months had passed since they moved into the new house. Autumn gave way to winter, and the first frost covered the garden in the mornings. The routine was established, comfortable like an old sweater. Adrian had found his rhythm as a father, learning daily, making mistakes sometimes, but always present. His home office had become a balanced command center. He conducted business in the mornings while the girls were at school and reserved afternoons and evenings for the family. His partners had adapted to the new arrangement, especially after they realized that Adrian, calmer and more centered, made even better decisions than before. It was a normal Wednesday. Adrian had just finished a video conference with investors when he heard the front door open and the familiar sound of backpacks hitting the floor and giggles filling the hallway. Claire had picked the girls up from school. "Do we have hot chocolate?" Sophie's enthusiastic voice reached him as he walked toward the kitchen. "Yes, I'll make some," Claire replied. "But first take off your coats and get ready for homework. We have work to do today." A chorus of dramatic sighs followed the request, making Adrian smile. He closed his laptop and entered the kitchen, where the girls were now seated at the table. "How was school?" he asked, kissing the top of each of their heads. "We learned about dinosaurs," Sophie exclaimed, her green eyes shining with excitement. "The teacher said some had feathers." "We had a math test," said Naomi quietly, adjusting her blue glasses. "I think I did well." "I'm sure you did," Adrian replied with a smile. Naomi had a natural knack for numbers that constantly amazed him. Emily, as always, was more reserved. "I checked out a book from the big kids section," she said with a small smile of pride. "The librarian said I read really well for my age." "That's wonderful, Emily." Adrian sat at the table while Claire served hot chocolate for everyone. "Which book did you pick?" Emily pulled out a worn copy of The Secret Garden from her backpack. She said it's about a girl who discovers a hidden garden and makes friends. "That's one of my favorite books," Claire commented, sitting with her own cup. "Lara loved it when she was little." Mentioning Lara no longer brought that heavy silence it once did. Now it felt like a gentle presence they could share with fondness. "Mom read me stories every night," Naomi said, looking distant for a moment, even when she was tired. Adrian felt the familiar tightening in his chest that always came when the girls shared memories of Lara. It was a mixture of gratitude for how devoted she was as a mother and sadness for the time he missed, the memories he would never have. "She was a wonderful mother," he said simply. "Do you think she would be happy you're here now?" Sophie asked suddenly, with the candid directness only children have. The question caught Adrian off guard. He looked at Claire, who nodded slightly, encouraging him. "I think so," he replied after a moment. "Your mother wanted the best for you always. She wrote that in the letter she left." "Grandma showed us the letter," said Emily, "last night." Adrian looked at Claire, surprised. "I thought it was time," she explained. "They have a right to know their mother's words." He nodded, understanding. The girls had matured a lot in the past months. Therapy was helping Emily process her feelings. Naomi was more confident. Sophie, always the most adaptable, blossomed with stability. "Oh, and what did you think of the letter?" Adrian gently asked. "Mom wasn't mad at you," said Naomi, thoughtful. "Just sad." "She wanted you to find us," added Sophie. "And you found us." Emily took a sip of her hot chocolate before speaking. She said, "We deserve a better future. Are you trying to give that to us?" The question was so direct, so profound, coming from someone so small, that Adrian felt his throat tighten. "Yes, Emily, I'm trying with all my heart." Emily nodded as if confirming something she already knew. "Let's finish the hot chocolate and start homework," Claire suggested, noticing the emotion in the air. "Do you have a lot to do today?" "I have to write about what I want to be when I grow up," said Sophie. "I have math problems," said Naomi. "I need to read 2 chapters and answer questions," added Emily, pointing to her new book. They finished the hot chocolate, and the girls began pulling notebooks and books from their backpacks. Adrian helped organize materials on the table, while Claire prepared dinner. It was an arrangement that worked well. She cooked, he supervised homework. Both had found their roles in this new family setup. Adrian was about to return to his office to finish some emails when he heard Sophie's voice. "Daddy, help with homework." He froze in place. It was the first time any of them had called him that. Daddy. A simple word, 3 syllables carrying a world of meaning. He turned slowly, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Sophie looked at him expectantly, holding a pencil and an open notebook. Next to her, Naomi and Emily watched his reaction, as if testing the waters. "Of course," he replied, his voice slightly trembling. "Of course I'll help." He sat down among them, aware that something fundamental had changed. An invisible barrier had been broken. From the corner of his eye, he saw Claire in the kitchen doorway, watching with a soft smile. "So," he said, trying to act normally despite the emotion, "what do you need help with?" "I don't know what to write about what I want to be when I grow up," said Sophie, showing the blank page with just the title at the top. "Well, what do you like to do?" Adrian asked. "What makes you happy?" Sophie thought for a moment, biting her pencil. "I like to draw, and to make up stories for my drawings." "That sounds like an artist or maybe a comic book writer," suggested Adrian. Sophie's eyes lit up. "Can I be that? A person who tells stories with drawings?" "Of course you can. You can be whatever you want to be." As Sophie began writing enthusiastically, Adrian turned to Naomi. "And you, math, right?" Naomi nodded, showing him a notebook with addition and subtraction problems. "Some are hard. Let's look at them together." With patience, Adrian guided Naomi through the problems, using concrete examples to explain concepts. He discovered she understood quickly when she visualized numbers as groups of objects. "So if I have 19 apples and give 7 to someone, how many are left?" 19 minus 7. Naomi counted on her fingers. 12. "Exactly." Finally, he turned to Emily, who was already reading her book, completely absorbed. "Do you need help with any difficult words?" She looked up from the book. "What is melancholy?" "It's a kind of sadness," Adrian explained, "when you feel a bit down and thoughtful." Emily nodded, understanding. "Like when it rains and we look out the window thinking about things." Adrian smiled. It was a perfect description. "So it's exactly like that." They worked together for nearly an hour. Adrian was surprised by how easily the girls accepted his guidance now, by how they trusted his explanations. A few months ago, Emily barely spoke to him. Naomi was too shy to ask for help. And Sophie, though always friendly, kept a certain emotional distance. Now they sat close to him, asking questions, laughing at his jokes, sharing their thoughts. And they had called him Daddy. Not Adrian, not Mr. Wolf, but Daddy. The word he never imagined he'd hear, a word he didn't deserve, but was now determined to honor. When they finished, Sophie closed her notebook with a dramatic flourish. "All done. I'm going to be a comic book artist and draw adventures about 3 sisters with superpowers." "I can't wait to read it," Adrian said, smiling. Suddenly, Sophie leaned in and hugged him, her little arms wrapping around his neck. "Thank you, Daddy, for helping us." Adrian felt the warmth of that small body against his, the pure trust of that embrace, and something inside him, something hard and cold he had carried for years, began to melt. Naomi moved closer too, resting her head on his shoulder. "It was good that you came into our lives," she said, her voice soft as always but full of sincerity. Emily didn't move from her spot, but she met Adrian's eyes and nodded slightly. "It really was," she agreed with that seriousness that characterized her. "It used to be harder." Adrian tried to respond, to thank them, to say how much they meant to him, how they had transformed his empty life into something full of purpose and love. But words didn't come. His throat was tight with emotion, his eyes burned with tears he fought to hold back. Instead of speaking, he just hugged Sophie and Naomi tighter, extending an arm to include Emily, who hesitated for a moment before stepping in and allowing the group hug. The tears Adrian had tried to hold back finally escaped, running silently down his face. They weren't tears of sadness or regret like the ones he had shed when reading Lara's letter. They were tears of pure gratitude from a man who had been given a second chance he didn't deserve, but was determined to honor for the rest of his life. Claire watched from the doorway, her own eyes glistening. She knew better than anyone what that moment meant, not just for Adrian, but for the girls too. Healing was happening, slowly but steadily. The family Lara had dreamed of for her daughters was forming in a way no one could have predicted. Dinner that night was joyful, full of conversation and laughter. The girls shared stories from school, talked about weekend plans, discussed what they wanted for the approaching holidays. Adrian and Claire exchanged occasional glances across the table, a silent communication between adults who understood the preciousness of the moment. After dinner, after desserts, chocolate pudding Claire had made, after the kitchen was tidied with all three girls helping without complaint for the first time, came bath and bedtime. Adrian, as he had for every night now, took part in the ritual. He helped Sophie find her unicorn pajamas, listened to Naomi practice a new song she was learning, discussed with Emily the first chapter of her new book. When they were all in pajamas, teeth brushed, ready for bed, he went from room to room to say goodnight, as he did every night. First Sophie, then Naomi, and finally Emily, the order they had naturally established. In Sophie's room, she was already under the covers, hugging the green teddy bear he had given her months ago. "Story tomorrow?" she asked, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "The best one," Adrian promised, tucking the blanket around her. Sophie sat up slightly, and with a quick motion kissed his face. "Good night, Daddy." Once again the word hit him like a wave of warmth. Adrian smiled, unable to speak, and kissed her forehead in return. In Naomi's room, he found her already asleep, her glasses still on her face. Gently, he took them off and placed them on her bedside table. He tucked the blankets around her, careful not to wake her. Even asleep, she seemed to smile. Finally, Emily's room, the tidiest of the three, with books neatly lined on the shelf and drawings carefully pinned to the wall. She was sitting on the bed, still reading. "Just one more page?" she asked before he could speak. Adrian smiled. Just one more." He sat on the edge of the bed, waiting patiently as she finished the paragraph. When she closed the book, Emily surprised him with a question. "Did you know we were waiting for you?" Adrian blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "Mommy said that one day you would come. That one day you'd realize what you'd lost." Emily spoke without looking at him, her fingers tracing the outline of the book in her lap. "I didn't really believe it, but Sophie and Naomi did." Adrian felt his heart tighten. "I'm sorry it took me so long." Emily finally looked at him. "You came, that's what matters." With that, she lay down and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Adrian covered her properly, making sure she was comfortable. "Good night, Emily." "Good night, Daddy." The word coming from Emily, the most resistant, the most suspicious, was the most precious gift he could receive. Adrian felt tears return to his eyes, but he didn't mind hiding them. He turned off the light, leaving only the small lamp Emily preferred on, and headed for the door. He was about to leave when he heard her small voice, clear in the dim light. "We love you." Adrian froze, hand on the doorknob, heart beating so hard it felt like it would burst. "I love you too," he answered, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I ever thought I could love anyone." He closed the door softly and stood in the hallway for a long moment, letting the tears flow freely now. Tears of gratitude, of love, of completeness. Claire found him there, leaning against the wall, his face wet. She said nothing, just took his hand and squeezed it gently. A simple gesture that said everything that needed to be said. Together they walked to the living room, where the fireplace crackled and 2 cups of tea waited. The house was silent, warm, safe. A home, in the truest sense of the word. Spring arrived in full force. The garden of the new house exploded in color. Tulips, daffodils, fragrant lilacs. The trees Adrian had planted with the girls in autumn began showing their first leaves. It was a perfect Saturday in April. Claire sat in the garden, a book open in her lap, reading, glasses perched on her nose. She watched Adrian washing the car in the driveway. A common, everyday scene, and yet, for all of them, extraordinary. A year had passed since that encounter in the cemetery. A year of transformations, challenges, learnings. A year of healing. Claire had changed. She no longer sold cakes out of necessity. She now had friends, a book club, time for herself. The deep lines under her eyes had faded. She smiled more. Adrian was a different man, too. He still ran his businesses, but now from home with completely different priorities. He had learned to braid hair, to make snacks, to listen to children's stories without rushing. He discovered there was more satisfaction in a drawing stuck on the fridge than in any million-dollar contract. The girls would return soon from their art class. They insisted they could make the walk on their own. "We're big now, Daddy." And the school was only 3 blocks away. Still, Adrian couldn't help feeling anxious until he saw them turn the corner. His thoughts were interrupted by excited voices. The girls appeared carrying their sketchbooks, chatting and laughing with each other. When they saw him, their faces lit up. "There's a Daddy." 3 voices in unison, 3 pairs of legs running toward him. Adrian barely had time to drop the drying cloth before they collided into him in a collective hug. "Easy there," he laughed, staggering. "You're going to knock me over like that." "Look what I drew." Sophie was the first to step back, showing a colorful painting of a house with 5 figures. "I wrote a song in class," said Naomi, her voice more confident now. "I finished the book you gave me," added Emily. "And the teacher said my essay was the best in the class." Claire watched the scene, smiling. The man who once walked away from everything out of fear was now the family's gravitational center, the safe harbor to which the girls ran with their joys. "Grandma!" Sophie finally spotted Claire and ran to show her drawing. After the initial excitement, the girls went inside to change clothes. Adrian joined Claire in the garden. "They're so independent," she remarked. "They grow up too fast," Adrian agreed. "Feels like just yesterday they looked at me with distrust in the cemetery. You did better than I expected. They made it easy. They taught me more than I taught them." When the girls returned, they asked for ice cream. After some negotiation, they settled on fruit now and ice cream after dinner. They nestled on the garden's wicker sofa, with Adrian in the middle. Immediately, all 3 tucked themselves around him, Sophie practically in his lap, Naomi leaning against his right shoulder, Emily at his left, keeping a small space but close enough to feel his warmth. The sun began to set, casting a golden light over the garden. Adrian looked at his daughters, at Claire reading peacefully, at the house that was now truly a home. Laughter echoed through the air, the scent of flowers filled his lungs, the feeling of belonging warmed his heart. "What's wrong, Daddy?" Naomi asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Adrian smiled, wrapping them in a collective hug. "I never imagined that what I most needed was to be called Daddy and have you in my life," he said, his voice overflowing with sincere emotion. Sophie laughed. But now you know." "Now I know," he agreed, kissing the top of her head. Emily, usually so reserved,